Hello and welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of All Geeks Aside. And this week I wanted to say something that really weird happened to me. I introduced a 5-year-old to my podcast, and now I will understand that she is my daughter, but she said that she started listening to my show on YouTube because all kids these days are obsessed with YouTube. And she asked me if I would do an episode on Robin. And I said, cool. But I didn't pick the Robin that she thinks of. I picked the second Robin. That would be Jason Todd. Now, Jason Todd is a member of the Bat family. And the Bat family is similar to the Justice League in that they work together, but they treat each other more like family than the Justice League would. So some of the members from the Bat family include, first and foremost, as Bruce Wayne, because he's Batman, Alfred Pennyworth. We have Dick Grayson as Robin, and then in the future as Nightwing. We have Barbara Gordon as Batgirl, and in the future Oracle. Then we have Jason Todd as Robin. Then we have Tim Drake as Robin, and then Red Robin. Then we have John Paul Valley, who became a stand-in for Batman, eventually becoming Azrael Bat. Then we have Batwoman, who is Catherine Kane. And we have Damian Wayne as Robin in the future. He is the son of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul, but we'll get into that in probably a future episode. And then we have my favorite Robin, Jason Todd. Now, Jason Todd did have a very, very bad upbringing, we'll say. Not terrible, but bad. He's born to a Catherine Elizabeth and Willis Todd. Now, his dad, Willis, was a petty criminal, and he ends up getting arrested for a crime and put in jail. He is later released, but doesn't return home because he made a mistake and screwed over Harvey Dent Two-Face. So he is now stuck with his mom, who is falling into deep depression along with being addicted to drugs. In order for him to help his mom out, since obviously she's not really working too much, he decides that he's going to go and steal car parts and sell them to keep his mom with a supply of food and undoubtedly in a supply of drugs that she is getting from his money that he is providing them. Now, being addicted to drugs, shortly after this, his mom does eventually overdose on the drugs, and now he is left alone with nobody to help him, to bring him up. And he's still stealing car parts to get money for himself to keep him alive, but he's now living on the streets of Gotham. One night, while on his patrol for car parts, he happens upon Crime Alley, and he spots the Batmobile. He manages to get one of the wheels off of the Batmobile, and he's in the process of taking the second one when he's discovered by Batman. Now, stealing anybody's tires, you would expect to get a beating for this, but Batman doesn't. Batman offers him food instead, and while they're eating, or at least while he's eating, Batman starts talking to him, and he tells him that sometimes if you give people a chance, they might surprise you. Now, Batman decides to try and help Jason and get him into some kind of boarding school so that he doesn't have to live on the streets anymore, and he sets him up at Magon School for Wayward Boys. Unfortunately, this wasn't just any normal school. It was an establishment for training children as criminals. But in spite of this, Jason still found it as some form of a home while he was there. Batman eventually realized that this was actually the front for a criminal training organization, and he goes and rescues him. And Jason does have a hand in his rescue from Magon. Now, Magon, if nobody knows what she was similar to a crime boss. She looks like a female version of Wilson Fisk from Spider-Man. It's the easiest way I can describe her. Batman now has nowhere to send poor Jason Todd, but he has a history of taking in young boys and keeping them at his house at Wayne Manor and then training them to be his sidekick. So Batman decides to take him in and teach him and train him. So Jason is a stand-in or replacement for Dick Grayson. But Jason is not an acrobat. He doesn't know how to fight, really. He has street smarts. And it takes 6 months of training before Jason could go out into the real world and be the boy wonder Robin. And it was his tenacity and his determination to live up to Dick Grayson's legacy, but he can't. Not completely. He's haunted by the memory of his father, by the bad things that his father had done and was actually in the process of teaching him how to do. Now, Jason does receive mentoring and training from Nightwing as well as Bruce Wayne Batman, and he eventually is proficient in many forms of martial arts and many different fighting techniques. And he may not have the acrobatic prowess that Dick Grayson had, but he made up for it by being fueled by pure anger and by being driven by wanting to be the best that he could be. But being a child of the streets of Gotham, he had a kind of skewed sense of justice, as in he sees right and wrong slightly differently, and that excessive force to him is okay. For instance, Jason liked to use guns. Now we know Batman didn't like guns, but Jason did use weapons from time to time. But his form of street justice is probably more clearly seen of his treatment of a one Felipe Garzonzosa. Now this was a foreign national who had viciously raped a young woman who would eventually take her own life because of what happened to her. Now this drove Jason to go in search of him, because you see, he got away with it because of his father's diplomatic immunity. Now I know this sounds like a crazy episode of Law and Order SVU, but it's not. This is how this goes down. Now Jason Todd does go and find him, and Batman is also looking for him at this time. But Jason gets there first. Jason tracks him down to his apartment, and upon getting there, Batman also arrives outside, and the last thing he sees is Felipe falling from his balcony and dying. Now Jason said he didn't do it. He didn't push him, he just slipped and fell, he got startled. But Batman doesn't believe him, and now he broke Batman's one rule of no killing. Jason Todd grew more and more restless as this goes on. He begins disobeying orders from Batman, as well as leaving himself open to be shot. When Batman goes to Alfred and says he's considering asking Jason to take some time off, Jason bursts in and is clearly angry about all this, and tells Bruce to talk to Alfred as he leaves the room. Jason then goes walking towards his old neighborhood, and he comes across an old family friend, a friend of his mother's. And this friend has some of his mom's stuff. He's going through this box of old things from his mother, and he finds out something rather important. He finds out that Catherine Todd wasn't actually his real mother, not his birth mother at least. He also learns that his mother's name started with the letter S, and as it happens, he also finds his dad's old address book, and in it there is 3 names that start with the letter S. He takes these names and he goes to the Bat computer, since it is the most sophisticated computer in all of Gotham at least, and he looks up all these names. Thinking that Batman doesn't really want to have anything to do with this kind of an investigation, he goes off by himself. And as it happens, at the same time, the Joker was in the Middle East trying to hijack a nuclear warhead. Jason goes to the first woman, and it's not her. So Batman now has no sidekick, and Joker is trying to hijack nuclear weapons in the Middle East. So now he has 2 things to look for. He eventually catches up with Jason, and he decides that yes, I will help you on your quest. The next name on the list was, oddly enough, a world-renowned assassin by the name of Lady Shiva. Batman decides that he's going to confront her by himself, and he defeats her, but he has to use a truth serum to get her to talk, and then she obviously turns around and says, nope, not me. After a time, Jason finally finds his real mom, whose name is Sheila Haywood, and everything seems great. They seem like they're perfectly content, that nothing's going wrong, but she has a troubled past, and the Joker is blackmailing her for her past. You see, something went wrong in Gotham years before, and it ended up with a teenager being killed at the hands of his mom, Sheila, and as a result, she was blacklisted from practicing medicine anymore, and at the time, she had been working as an aid worker in the Middle East, and the Joker is using this information to blackmail her. And what's the cost, you ask? Well, the cost is her son, Jason Todd. Jason goes after his mother and the Joker by himself. even after Batman tells him not to. He shows her, when they meet up this time, that he is in fact Robin. And she says it's okay, the Joker's long gone. But he's not. He was waiting right around the corner for him the whole time. And then Sheila hands her own son over to the Joker. The Joker begins to savagely beat him and reveal that this was his master plan the whole time. That everything that had happened up to this point, his mother dying, it was the Joker who poisoned her. Meeting Batman that very first night, he had something, at least a hand in all of this whole time. And the Joker continues to beat him with a crowbar. And then he double crosses Jason Todd's mother and ties them both up, leaves them in a warehouse with a bomb. The last thing that Jason did before the bomb went off was try and shield it from his mother in a last-ditch effort to save her. And Batman came in at the last minute to see the warehouse explode. And then he tears through the rubble to find Jason's lifeless body next to his mother. Batman takes the two bodies back to Gotham for their burial. The death of Jason Todd weighs heavy on Batman's head from here on out. He takes steps for it to never happen again, extra training, more rigorous training. When the actions of Superboy Prime punching his way into the main reality, something happened to Jason Todd's body. He came back to life, but he was in a coffin, so he has to kill Billet out of the coffin, and when he gets out, he walks away. And he walks almost 12 miles, and he then collapses. And he is found by a couple who are just driving down the road, and they bring him to a hospital to help him out. He is admitted to the hospital, obviously enough, since he is passed out. And he's admitted under John Doe because he has no identification. He's just wearing a suit. He was just found on the side of the road, beaten to death, almost. And he slips into a coma. He would eventually awaken and escape through a window. However, as a result of this savage beating at the hand of the Joker, he now has some brain damage. And he's still in a semi-coma, kind of foggy, walking around. And unfortunately, he lives on the streets again. But his instincts and his muscle memory are still there, and he knows still how to fight. So one day, a homeless man attacks him, and Jason Todd, even in his catatonic state, fights back. And his moves are seen by a hired thug that Robin had fought in the past. This thug, wanting to make some money off of this and get a reward off someone, starts telling people that Robin is still alive. And word would eventually get to Talia al Ghul. And she had then paid someone to go and kidnap the boy. Talia al Ghul takes Jason Todd to her father, Raj al Ghul. And he's intrigued by this, but not convinced. Doesn't see what Talia's interest in this boy is. He has severe brain damage. Yes, he can fight. So what are they to do with him? Well, Raj al Ghul decides that, out of respect for Bruce Wayne, to care for the boy and keep him safe. And that was it. Raj al Ghul did not want to do anything else with this boy, and he did not want Batman to find out that he was still alive. However, Talia saw things differently, and she disobeyed her father, and she took Jason to the Lazarus Pit. And her father was in there at the time. You see, the Lazarus Pit is how Raj al Ghul is still alive. He is in fact hundreds of years old, and this magical pit of water keeps him alive, even when almost nothing else will work. So after getting thrown into the Lazarus Pit, Jason Todd's mind begins to come back, and it's now healing. He is still confused and he's panicking, but he's alive. His memories are slowly coming back, and Talia is rushing him out of the Lazarus Pit, and she tells him one thing: don't go to Batman. Find out the truth first. You have not been avenged. So Jason does this. He goes in search of the truth in a hole, and he discovers that after his murder, Batman had done nothing more than send the Joker back to jail, like his death was another one of Joker's crazy schemes. And this was too much for Jason to handle. It was only days after his traumatic revival from the Lazarus Pit, and he was now overwhelmed with grief and rage of what he had just learned. He believed that Batman only thought him as a expendable soldier, and that his death meant nothing to Batman. Unfortunately, we know the truth behind all of this, but Jason Todd doesn't know anything else. He doesn't speak to Batman about any of this. Jason returned to Gotham City, but he didn't go after Joker. He decided that he was going to use everything that Batman had taught him, everything that he'd learned from the streets, and he was going to set Batman up. He knew where to feed the information so Batman would hear about it. He fabricates a fictitious arms deal, and he knew where Batman would park the Batmobile. He also knew all the security features for the Batmobile, allowing him to rig it with an explosive while Batman was gone. This could have been the death of Batman, but when it came for Jason to push the button, he couldn't do it. He later explains to Talia that this was because he wanted Batman to know it was him in the end. He wanted to face Batman, and he wanted her to help him. Jason did not realize that Talia was shocked at his actions and the path he had set himself upon. He also did not realize that the only reason she was helping him in all this was so she could delay him from actually doing anything. He set about a quest for some further training. He underwent intensive training in weapons, became an expert sniper. He spent weeks learning from chemists about toxins and other chemicals. He went to train under a German assassin called Egon. No, not the Ghostbuster. And his quest took him on an unexpected turn. Egon was a highly skilled fighter, as was Jason. But Jason's fighting ability came from Batman. He was taught only how to defend and disable, and now he needed to learn how to maim and kill. So he spent weeks training. Eventually, Jason's suspicions of his new master, Egon, got the better of him. Something about this whole operation bothered him. Egon's men were thugs. They weren't expert killers. This and many other things led Jason to believe that Egon's business was more than contract killings, that they weren't a band of hired mercenaries. And he was right. He found out that Egon was in fact in child slavery. Immediately, he went and stole a truck that was transporting the children and brought them to safety. He then returned to Egon and killed him. Jason had just taken the first steps down his new path. In the months that followed, half of the dangerous men and women he'd studied under wound up dead by either his hands or his scheming. And these were no arbitrary killings in his eyes. These people deserved to die. This is what Batman should have been doing this whole time. Take the problem off the streets. This is what Jason Todd was doing. And this kept happening to him. Every master, expert, whatever you want to call it, that he went to train under turned out to be something else. For instance, the surveillance expert that he learnt from turned out to be a pedophile. The close combat master intended to murder her own family. The team of mercenaries that he joined left him to die in an ambush and were responsible for atrocities in Africa. He was willing to learn from these bad people to achieve his goals, but there was only so much that he could overlook. Eventually, Talia came to him with some surveillance images from Gotham City. And in these images, Batman had a new boy wonder. This new boy wonder was named Tim Drake. Now, Jason tried to shrug this off and pretend it didn't bother him. But this news came at a time when Jason had just learned that the Russian mob had planned to detonate explosives all around London in a staged terrorist attack. This wasn't something that he could do like the rest of his teachers. He had to fix this now. Killing them before they do it or while they've already got it done isn't going to do anything. Jason decides that he's going to prevent the terrorist attack, or at least the explosives, from detonating by sabotaging the bombs. But he ends up making a series of stupid mistakes that he would not normally have after hearing this news. And he was caught and left to the mercy of the Russians who were orchestrating this whole attack. Jason narrowly escapes with his life, and he went straight after the bomb-making teacher. Since his plan was to sabotage the bombs, and this failed, he needed to know where the bombs were going. And he made sure the bomb maker gave him some honest answers. He now had a list of names, and he's scrambling throughout London to find the suicide bombers, or at least the bombers who have the payloads, and taking them out all at the same time. He catches up with the final bomber just in time as he throws it off of Westminster Bridge. Jason's done with the mission and he heads back to his safe house. But the Russians were waiting for him. Jason takes out this whole squad by himself, using all the skills that he'd learned up until this point. There's one person left, and he is pleading for his life, offering money, valuables, anything that he can, spouting out information that he has in his head, thinking that Jason could use some of it at least. It isn't until the man blurts out that he knows the whereabouts of the Joker that Jason starts to listen. He tells him where the Joker is, and he goes to track him down. You see, at the time, the Joker was planning one of his own crazy schemes. He planned to poison the drinking water in Gotham City so that all the people would burn with a smile on their face. The poison was actually a liquid that would travel through the water and would instantly ignite when it was met with the air. This would have taken out millions of people in Gotham. Jason wanted revenge against the Joker, so Jason decides to go after the Joker and kill him for what he had done, and for what he had done to not only him, but to everyone else. Jason is led to a warehouse where he finds the Joker and his henchmen. And knowing that he doesn't really have a lot of time to deal with these henchmen by himself, he has a smoke grenade and releases it. Upon igniting, the henchmen start to slow down. Their movements are fuzzy, but the henchmen have guns and they start opening fire blindly at Jason, not knowing where he is. However, the body armor that Jason had on saved him from death. Jason wanted to kill the Joker in public, but he knew he had to do it quickly. Jason placed the Joker in a small warehouse where he started to pour gasoline all over the Joker, remembering what the Joker had done to him, savagely beating him with the crowbar. But Jason couldn't ignite the fire. He couldn't drop the lighter. He soon left, and he heard the henchman opening the door. He would go back to Talia and tell her that he couldn't do it. He needed Batman to be there. Batman needed to witness him killing the Joker. Talia was very useful in giving Jason intel about stuff that was happening in Gotham. And when she tells him about a character by the name of Hush, who was planning to screw with Batman, she thought that Jason should be part of this. And Talia agreed to set up a meet with Hush. The next night, Jason Todd meets with the man by the name of Hush. And Hush had been told by the Riddler that the Batman was actually Bruce Wayne. And Jason confirms it. In return for his confirmation of Batman's true identity, Hush agrees to him that he can be a part of the plan and that he can face off against Batman one last time. He eventually gets his opportunity and was dismayed by not seeing any flash of regret on Batman's face when he finally comes in. But then he slips out of the fight and letting Clayface take his place, and Batman is none the wiser that Jason Todd has truly returned and is truly alive. But now that Jason had fulfilled this part of his mission, it was time for his next part, and Talia had crafted a red helmet for him, as well as a new set of blades. Jason would return to Gotham City not as Robin, but he now took on the guise of the one thing that he feared the most. Just like Batman had taken on the name Batman because bats are what was his one fear, Jason Todd feared the Red Hood. He feared the Joker. But he did not come to fight crime in the city. He came to influence it, to take out all of the corruption, all of the drug deals, and he came to avenge his death. He calls a meet with some of the top street dealers in all of Gotham, and he tells them that he is now running the drug trade in Gotham City, and they laugh. But the laughing stops when he shows them the severed heads of the top lieutenants of the top gangs in the city, and he tells them, it's simple. You give me 40%, you don't deal to kids. You break the second rule, you die. He also takes on some of the larger gangs and gains control of many of them. And this ultimately causes a one-man war between himself and the crime lord known as Black Mask. One of the things that really pisses off Black Mask was when he disrupted a major weapons shipment. And what was in the weapons shipment is what was truly amazing. It was an android called an Amazo, which is able to mimic any superpower. And having activated the Amazo android, Batman and Nightwing are left to deal with it. He also took a crate of kryptonite that was destined for Black Mask. And he was willing to sell it back to Black Mask, but the Black Mask refuses, and instead he sends Mr. Freeze out to kill the Red Hood. But having been trained by Batman, Red Hood, Jason Todd, was expecting to be double-crossed in such a fashion. And he took out the hitmen that were accompanying Mr. Freeze and escaped when Nightwing and Batman showed up. Now he's done making his inaugural debut in Gotham. He has shown the drug dealers what's what. Batman is aware of his presence, but not aware of who he is just yet. So now he's made his big debut as the Red Hood. He decides to go and track down the Joker. And he finds him at an abandoned fairground. Typical Joker. But he doesn't kill him. No, not this time. But he does beat him near death with a crowbar. Exactly like what he did to him. Jason Todd will continue his activities as the Red Hood, enforcing his new rules for the drug trade and warring with the Black Mask. But he doesn't consider himself a murderer. He's a killer. The people he killed are not innocent. And finally he faces off against Batman, 1-to-1, and both unmask before each other, confirming who he really was to Batman. Now that his identity is no longer a mystery to anyone, he needs to prove that he was the better Robin. Now you see, the new Robin, Tim Drake, was not only fighting with Batman, he was also fighting with the Teen Titans. And when Jason Todd was fighting with Batman, he too fought with the Teen Titans. So Jason Todd goes ahead and he breaks into Titan Tower, and he fights with Cyborg and Beast Boy and defeats them with ease. Now Raven is also at the tower, but she's asleep. And she was always nice to him, so he decides that he's going to leave her be and just let her sleep and have at least a good dream for that one night. And she had always told him to watch his temper. That even though, yes, she was a crazy sorcerer who could tap into her father's powers when she wished to. And yes, I will probably do an episode on Raven. She was my favorite Teen Titan after Robin. So he decides to get rid of Beast Boy and Cyborg after he defeats them, so that he can be left alone with Tim Drake and not be interrupted. Now Jason Todd and Tim Drake have a little conversation before they have their little fight. And Tim Drake claims that Todd is cleaning up Gotham the easy way. It is then that he removes his helmet and reveals to him who he really is. But under his helmet he's wearing a Robin mask. And then he rips off his shirt, revealing that he's also wearing an adult Robin costume. Now the two Robins begin to fight, and Jason is being ridiculed by the belief that Tim figured out who Batman really was, and said that if anything, Batman meant for him to find out. And then the fight ends up in the Memorial Hall, where all the past Titans have statues commemorating their service to the Teen Titans. And he notices that he doesn't have one. And he may have only been a Titan for a brief time, but everyone else had a statue. Now during the fight, he becomes to realize why Batman chose Tim to be the next Robin. He's impressed by him. And to beat him, Jason Todd had to cheat. He had to gas him and leave him unconscious for the Titans to find him later. Yes, he did beat him pretty bad, but to finally put him down, he had to use the gas to knock him unconscious. And before he leaves a note for the Titans on the wall in blood. And it reads, Jason Todd was here. Now Jason, after this, wonders if he had friends like Tim Drake has, would he have been a better person through all of this? Now the Red Hood starts to put his final plan into action. He goes out and he kidnaps the Joker and takes him to Crime Alley, where they first met, where Batman and he first met, and where Bruce Wayne's parents had died. He lures Batman to the house that he has the Joker held up in, and he asks him why he didn't murder the Joker to avenge him. And Batman says that he refuses to kill anyone. The two begin to fight, and while they're fighting, they're arguing with each other, and this is what Bruce uses to beat him. It's this distraction. Getting the Joker from where he had hidden him, Jason finally gives Batman an ultimatum and tells him that you need to kill the Joker or kill me. And then Jason Todd tosses Batman a pistol, takes up a position behind Joker, points the gun on his head and begins to count to 3. Batman is standing there, straight-faced as he always is. And at the count of 3, he launches a batarang and cuts something that's hanging over his head, and in the process hits Jason Todd on the face and neck and injures him, and he doesn't kill the Joker. But in this whole confusion, the Joker ends up getting kind of free. He's now knocked on the floor in his chair, and he sets off a bomb that is close by and the Red Hood and Batman are launched out of the building and plunge into the bay behind the building that they are held up in at the time. Jason survives the explosion, obviously, because Batman does, and they're doing some surveillance on criminals in and around Gotham, and he overhears a conversation that Deathstroke was having about having framed Black Lightning for murder, and Jason ends up passing this information on to Dick Grayson, who is Nightwing. Some months after this, Jason decides that he's going to leave Gotham and take up a position in New York City, more specifically in Manhattan. And his goal here is that he's going to take up the mantle of Nightwing, since Dick Grayson is now no longer acting as Nightwing at the time. And Dick does find out. And to Jason, this is all just a big joke. But Dick Grayson's not really happy with the methods that Jason Todd uses, because Jason Todd does kill, and Nightwing has the same rules as Batman. No killing, but beat him half to death. And then a third Nightwing comes along. And the Jason Todd as Nightwing and this new Nightwing, Cheyenne Fremont, they partner up together, and they have to take on a pair of metahuman brothers who are terrorizing New York City at the time. And in their battle between these metahumans, Jason Todd is almost killed, and he's temporarily mutated into some form of creature, and he has to get help from Dick Grayson to turn him back to normal. And after this, Jason Todd, I'm guessing, is bored with being Nightwing, so he just drops it again and decides that he's going to take back up the mantle of the Red Hood. But he's not going to do it in New York, or he's not going to do it in Gotham anymore. No, he goes to Star City, which is the home of the Green Arrow. Now, he does end up going here because a weapon shipment that he had ordered was stopped by the Green Arrow and Batman. So he wanted to make a point. He goes to Star City and he makes an agreement with one of the crime bosses there by the name of Brick. And he does so to keep the heroes busy, to allow him to abduct Green Arrow's sidekick Speedy. So he tests Speedy's abilities and talks to her, and it turns out that they actually had a lot in common. They were both street kids, and they were both taken in by billionaire mentors. And she knew that he did have to do some bad things sometimes because it was for the greater good. Green Arrow and Batman arrived to rescue Speedy from the gymnasium that Red Hood had her held up in. But Red Hood decides that he's going to explode it. And she does survive, saying that she managed to escape just before the blast. However, Speedy thinks that Jason might have actually just let her go. Now, Jason Todd has seen a lot of death in his days. A lot of people have died at his hand, and he has seen a lot of people die at other people's hands. But when he witnesses the death of the Joker's daughter at the hands of one of the monitors, you see, this is around the time when the Anti-Monitor is preparing to turn all of the Earths into one Earth. This is when a series of events start to happen that Jason Todd is in deep with. You see, he witnesses the death by a monitor, and a second monitor attempted to intervene. Now, naturally, he was suspected of being the murderer of Joker's daughter, and he decides that he's going to lay low to avoid any detection from any of the heroes that are close by. But when Donna Troy finds the second monitor hiding, Jason Todd told her the truth of what happened, and that it wasn't this second monitor, it was the first one, suspecting that they both may also be targets due to their unique resurrections. And then they were attacked by a woman calling herself Forerunner, and the second monitor saves them from death. This monitor, who Jason decides to name Monitor Bob, so that they can not just call him Monitor, since every one of these monitors is called Monitor. He warns them of a disaster that is coming, and he drafts them both to help search for Ray Palmer, who is, the Atom, claiming that he is the key to stop everything. The group decide to call themselves the Challengers from Beyond, and they proceed on a quest through the new multiverses, and are eventually joined by none other than Kyle Rayner, one of the Green Lanterns. Now, during these travels through the different multiverses, Jason encounters several versions of Batman, including one who is a vampire and also one who was a Russian terrorist. He even goes to an Earth where he had taken up the cowl and become Batman himself. Jason starts to become frustrated with Bob in his inability to find Ray Palmer and the possibility that Kyle's presence was hindering everything, because you see Kyle was actually romantically interested in Donna Troy. Now, Donna Troy, I forgot to mention this, Donna Troy is a child version of Wonder Woman. She is a Amazon with the similar powers as Wonder Woman. Some people call her Wonder Woman's daughter. I can't remember the whole story, so I won't get into it, but that's partially her story. And it did not help that there's other monitors at the time allying themselves against the monitor known as Solomon, who is trying to kill all of these heroes who have resurrected in some strange way, and the monitor who killed Joker's daughter, and that the supervillain known as Monarch was raising a multiversal army to battle everyone. So Jason Todd is stuck in a seriously chaotic situation. He doesn't know where to turn. And they eventually find Ray, who's seemingly on a perfect Earth. The heroes had retired. They live happy, normal lives now, and crime, due to the supervillains, was so minor. And upon finding Ray, Bob turns on them, revealing that he only used them to help him find Ray Palmer, that he was really working for the Monitor Solomon, and his mission was to kill Ray. The Monarch's army suddenly arrives and war breaks out on this seemingly perfect Earth. Jason becomes separated from everyone, and he gets captured and interrogated by this Earth's Batman. And it is then that this Batman reveals to him that after his death, or his counterpart on this Earth was killed by the Joker, the Batman began to use the same lethal force that he was using to take care of all the supervillains, to take him out of the Earth. This Batman then shows him the costume that his counterpart would have worn in the future had he not been killed, and Jason puts it on, becoming the Red Robin. Together, Batman and Jason Todd, now as Red Robin, go and fight the Monarch's army as best they could to protect the Earth. Unfortunately, this Earth's Batman is killed by Ultraman. Now, Ultraman is a evil variation of Superman who leads a crime syndicate who became because of the death of their version of Flash on a different Earth. It's all very confusing in the multiverse. After this, Jason Todd retreats to the planet Apocalypse, where Darkseid lives. But Apocalypse is no safer than this perfect Earth. Apocalypse isn't safe at all, really. It's like a hell on a planet. But at the time, it was being assimilated by Brother Eye. Now, Brother Eye is a satellite that was built by Batman to keep an eye on everyone. A surveillance statue, and it became sentient. And it was not only assimilating this planet, it was also assimilating other heroes and other supervillains that had been drawn into the whole crisis that was happening with the Anti-Monitor eating all the other Earths, with the heroes and villains being displaced to different worlds. Jason decides that he's going to take on Brother Eye, and he does defeat it. And the other heroes and villains were transported by Solomon to a Earth that was supposed to be theirs, but it wasn't really. It was just a very, very close facsimile of their actual Earth. And they witnessed this Earth being ravaged by the Anti-Monitor. But they managed to escape, and they end up back on their actual home Earth. And once there, Jason took his leave, and he is still in the Red Robin suit. And he decides to say that, I'm not a superhero. He can't do it, so he just takes off the suit and he's done with it. After this, Jason goes back to business, takes back up the moniker of the Red Hood. But because he was now away from his Earth for such a long time and trapped in the multiverse, he's lost a lot of ground in Gotham, and the crime lords were slowly creeping back to their old stupid ways of doing things, selling drugs to whoever they wanted, and Red Hood needed to assert his power once more. To do this, he starts a little gang war to try and thin the herd out a small bit. And he starts taking control of many of the gangs and putting them back under his control, under his rules. And the next step would be to get the corrupt cops out of Gotham. And during all of this, Batman was missing in action. So somebody had to do it. Somebody had to try and save this city that he so loved. He eventually runs across Tim Drake. Now, after him savagely beating him, you would think that he wouldn't want to have anything to do with him, and he doesn't. He asks him to join him to try and help this city, and obviously Tim says no, and they end up fighting. Now, Jason's getting the upper hand on Tim at the time, and then somebody coming dressed as Red Robin interferes with this whole fight and knocks Jason's gun away from his hands. Jason is then shot by a gangbanger who picked up his weapon, one of the things that Jason was trying to stop this whole time. Injured and hobbling away, he is no match for the cops who come and take him into police custody. He is processed as a John Doe and is sent to Blackgate Prison. Shortly thereafter, Tim Drake comes to visit Jason in the prison, and it turns out that Tim had used a variation of Jason's idea to deal with the chaos in Gotham, and Jason tells him that he did a good job. Tim then left, but not before giving Jason Todd a Justice League teleportation device so that he could escape. Jason doesn't wait too long. He uses it and escapes back to the streets of Gotham. However, his leg is still injured, so he can't really do much of anything. And as I mentioned before, Batman had been missing this whole time. And when it is confirmed that Batman is in fact dead, all the Bat family gather at the Batcave. Because as it turns out, Bruce left some kind of last will and testament in the form of a video for each of his quote-unquote family. And they each watch their individual videos in secrecy. Jason listens to his message, and then he leaves the Batcave without a word. And you see, Bruce had only told him one thing. He referenced something that happened in his childhood, a trauma, and he urged him to get help for it. But Jason, being hot-headed, he just gets angry and storms off and leaves. He's pushed over the edge by this message. Jason did not simply stand along the sidelines and watch Gotham fall into disarray and let the gangs take over all of Gotham. Now, I've always wondered why anyone would want to live in Gotham if it was constantly under a gang war. Constantly being attacked by some crazy scheme by the Joker, by Penguin, by name your supervillain that Batman takes on. But Jason decides that he's going to step it up. That he's not going to be the Red Hood anymore. That he's going to become the new Batman. But he's not going to stand by the rules that Batman had set forth. He's going to use his rules that he has always used, but now under the moniker of Batman. He becomes a 50-50 of Bruce Wayne and himself. He constructs himself a new Batsuit that is completely armored. He makes his own Batcave in the subway tunnels that have been abandoned under Gotham City after an earthquake that happened years previous. And he took to the streets. And he still uses his guns. And he still uses his lethal force. To me, he's similar to Bruce Wayne's father in Flashpoint. And after every successful takedown of a villain, he leaves a message declaring, "I am Batman," so that Gotham City will not forget that Batman has returned. But this new iteration of Batman doesn't go unnoticed by everyone. And he is confronted by Catwoman, who is a friend of Batman, while she is also a villain, during which he warned her that he would not be so lenient on her next time. That yes, Batman was, but he will not be. After an ambush by black masked thugs, it took Nightwing and Damian, who is the new Robin, to rescue him from being murdered. The lethal force he used in doing so was not appreciated by Dick Grayson, and the two former Robins clashed. And then Black Canary and Huntress arrived to back up Dick Grayson. In order to escape, Jason Todd had to shoot Damian. Arriving back at his new Batcave, he saw that Tim Drake had deduced who he was and where he was. And Tim is also dressed up in a new Batman costume, but it was actually an older version of Bruce Wayne's. And he came to challenge Jason for the right to be Batman. The two fight, and Jason strikes first. But he's not alone. Catwoman is there and trying to assist Tim Drake in his takedown of Jason Todd. And he has to knock out Catwoman in order to keep her out of this fight so that he and Tim can throw down against each other. Jason does have the upper hand in the fight until Tim finds a crowbar and uses it in his assault on Jason Todd. Tim is savagely beating Jason with this crowbar, and the only reason he stopped is because Jason had stabbed him in the stomach with a batarang. and the fight ends here. Tim collapses, but Tim uses a trick that Batman had taught him to slow down his heartbeat, to slow down his breathing in order to appear dead. And Jason drags his seemingly lifeless body away to another part of the subway tunnels. Now there's only one person left to stand in his way of being the true Batman of Gotham City, and that's Dick Grayson. And he still hadn't put on the Batman suit. He was refusing to do so. But he knew that Dick would eventually come as Nightwing to stop him from being the Batman that he was. So Jason sets up some traps in his Batcave. He sets up a taser trap in his cave, and when Dick arrives to battle him for the right, it leaves him open for Jason Todd to attack him. During this whole time, Dick Grayson is demanding to know where Tim was, and Jason keeps declaring that he's dead. But Dick doesn't believe him, even though Jason is rather convincing in his discussion that he is actually dead. You see, Dick Grayson doesn't think that Jason has gone that far yet. And he said that he knew what the message was from Bruce to him. And this only enraged Jason Todd. And he detonated bombs that he had planted out all around his Batcave, trying to end the fight as quickly as possible. But Dick Grayson just went harder. The fight eventually moved on to a speeding train that went by, and Dick kicked with slightly more force than he had expected to. And this caused Jason to get knocked off the train and was now dangling over the Gotham River. Dick reached out his hand to try and help him, but Jason refused. Instead, he let go and fell from a great height into the river below. But Jason survived. He eventually came back and gave up the mantle of Batman because Dick was Batman now, and he wanted to be his competition. So he went back to the drawing board and made a new costume for himself. He also stopped dyeing his hair black, as he had been doing this whole time. You see, Dick Grayson had black hair and Jason Todd had red hair, but he had always dyed it black. So letting his red hair regrow, it turned out that he had a small grey streak in his hair from his exposure to the Lazarus Pit. Jason didn't want to go it alone anymore, and he decided to find himself a sidekick. And he found a sidekick in a girl by the name of Scarlet. Now, she was the daughter of a criminal who had been tested on by a Professor Pig, and this Professor Pig liked to practice mutilation. His intent for taking a sidekick in Scarlet was to be the new dynamic duo, replacing the old one with a rougher, tougher incarnation. With his new partner, Jason resumed his brutal and lethal methods of dealing with criminals. But now there was a twist. He wasn't just defeating them and leaving them and hoping that the message would get spread by word of mouth. He was now using social media and the internet, and he exposed his methods to the public and actively marketed them as the way things should be done. And as it turns out, the public were behind him, especially when Batman and Robin protect the Penguin from himself and Scarlet. Throughout all of his missions at this time, he's able to keep one step ahead of Batman and Robin, getting to the criminals first and evading their apprehension attempts. That lasted until he had tracked down a criminal and he escaped and evaded capture by the Red Hood, and Batman and Robin arrived to stop them. And now the two duos fight. The fight was going in Jason's favor at the time. Instead of the two heroes capturing him, he captured them and locked them away so that he could go and find the criminal who had gotten away from him. It is at this time that Jason and Scarlet are ambushed by an assassin, and he takes 2 shots in the head, shattering his helmet. But there's something different about this assassin. Something about the way he fought. So much so that he even resisted going down when Batman and Robin joined in. Jason takes more fights as they fought the assassin known as Flamingo, including one in the leg. But in the end, it was Jason who took down the assassin. While the assassin was distracted with Scarlet, Jason came upon him and scooped him up in the large shovel of a backhoe. He then dumped Flamingo over the edge of a steep drop, intent on killing him. However, when they went down to the ground in the rubble, no body was to be found. After this little scuffle between Batman, Robin, Red Hood, and Scarlet, the Gotham City Police Department along with Commissioner Gordon show up, and Jason is taken into custody because he has been shot in the leg and he has no real way of escaping quickly. But he didn't go quietly. He told Dick that it was too late to do anything for him. He also accused Dick of not trying hard enough, because if he could be brought back to life, then so could Bruce. As far as Jason was concerned at this point, Dick was holding back because it was the only way he could ever be out of Bruce's shadow. Now Jason Todd is taken to prison and he is put in the Arkham Asylum. And while there, he is put through many psychiatric evaluations, and he passed them all. And he gets himself transferred out of that prison into a normal prison in Gotham City. Now free with many criminals at his disposal, Jason gets back to business. He starts killing higher profile criminals that are there, making their deaths look like suicides or murders by other inmates. And no one is the wiser that it is him. It is not until he poisoned 82 inmates that the warden realized that it was him, Jason, who was behind this whole thing. And Jason is transferred back to Arkham Asylum without waiting for Batman's help. While Jason is being transported, a team of mercenaries, known as Menagerie, intercept his transport vehicle and free him and bring him to their employer. Since this was not part of Jason's plan, he did not cooperate. Dick Grayson and Damian Wayne have to intervene and help him overcome the Menagerie. But they had a message for him. They said that their employer had Scarlet and was holding her hostage to ensure his cooperation. Now Jason, Dick and Damian have to cooperate in order to save Scarlet's life, starting with them taking Jason to one of his weapon caches so he can gear up and don the Red Hood one more time. But this doesn't last very long. As soon as he has Scarlet in his possession, they're reunited, knowing well that Dick and Damian would put him back in prison. He escapes on a helicopter and setting off explosives to keep the dynamic duo busy. And then we have post-Flashpoint Earth. Now, if you want to know what Flashpoint is, I have a whole episode on Barry Allen the Flash. It's very informative. If I remember correctly, go back and it will explain everything that happened. But what I will say is that after Flashpoint, certain things changed. Some for the better and some for the worse. Now, Jason after Flashpoint was no longer with Scarlet. He was now in a loose friendship with Roy Harper, who had been Green Arrow's sidekick at one time. And they ironically have a similar past. They were both failures as sidekicks, and they both went to the bad side. Now, during an attempted smuggling of a nuclear submarine into Miami, and it exploded, but Jason Todd escapes, he is rescued by Starfire, who was a member of the Teen Titans when he was, and she fishes him out of the drink, and then she nurses him back to health. This causes Starfire and Jason to have a quote-unquote friendship, and they decide to go and rescue Roy, who at the time was in prison. And they successfully break him out, and they're contacted by a group known as Allcast, more specifically by the member known as Essence. Now, Jason had trained with Allcast during his lost years when he was figuring out what to do when he was working with Talia al Ghul, and that didn't change after Flashpoint. But Jason had turned his back on this group. Now, Jason decides that he's going to ditch Roy and Starfire to try and look into all of this going on his own. That Allcast were now after him. And unfortunately, Jason isn't able to stay alone for very long because Roy eventually joins back up with him on a flight to the Himalayas while Starfire decides to fly ahead and get some transport for them. But Jason leaves once again to go and gear up, where he shoots down Susie Sue and her partner who were trying to sneak attack him. You see, Jason had worked for Susie Sue and her father at some point, and she was a leader of a criminal family in Hong Kong. And when he left them, he killed every member of Susie Sue's gang except her and her father. Jason is now fully geared up, and he decides to meet back up with Roy and Starfire and travel a bit ahead of them to the villages to find out what's going on, a bit of recon. And he discovers that the villagers have been massacred. So he goes and pays his respects to Dukra, who was a member of In that instance, the dead villagers reanimate and start to attack Jason. He turns and throws away his guns to fight them honorably, but Roy and Starfire catch up and they start killing the zombies. Jason fights alongside with them and they defeat the horde of villagers, and Jason sits and prays for them. Now Jason and the team have to gain entrance to the Chamber of All, but in order to do so, they need to give up a cherished memory to gain access. You see, in order to find the object that the group, the Untitled, who are tracking Jason and want to kill him, in order to find this object, they need to enter the Chamber of All to gather all the information. You see, that's what is held within the Chamber of All. Anything that you need to know is in there. After sharing their cherished memories, they enter the chamber and are met by a giant monster. Jason and Roy do their best to defend themselves, and Starfire lets herself be eaten. Jason finds the object in the middle of this fight and he retrieves it, and the object turns out to be nothing but a snow globe of Colorado. Meanwhile, Starfire, having been eaten and is now inside the monster, she proceeds to destroy it from the inside, killing it, and then she grabs Jason and Roy and flies out of the chamber. Jason questions the monk about the significance of this object and why the Untitled left it behind, but he gets no answer. Upon leaving, they are given the chance to collect their cherished memory back, and Roy and Starfire do, but Jason refuses. The memory turns out to be the night when he was Robin and he had the flu, and Bruce stayed home to look after him. The group then make their way to Colorado, to Middleton, Colorado to be specific. Jason, who's never far from a fight, ends up getting into a bar fight, and a cop comes by and takes him and Roy to the police station. Jason manages to subdue the cop while he looks for some records that could help him find the Untitled in Colorado. And the cop turns out to be one of the Untitled, but not the one that they're looking for. And the cop is about to rip out Jason's liver when Roy saves him. The pair head outside and they see a huge explosion that matches Starfire's energy signatures. Roy leaves Jason to go save Starfire while Jason stays behind to battle the Untitled. During the fight, he ends up falling into a frozen lake and has a flashback of his training with the Untitled, with the All-Cast. And he remembers that Durka had told him about being special and that he was just beginning a new journey. Jason proceeds to leap out of the ice, vowing that his trifles with Batman and his goal about killing Joker didn't matter anymore. He cuts himself to get the blood on the blades of the All to feed them, and Jason manages to kill the Untitled, setting a new goal that he will kill all of them one by one. It is revealed that the Untitled used her powers to keep the people away, but upon her death returned to the normal appearance as a mob appears. They think Jason just outright murdered the sheriff, and he runs off and gets Starfire and Roy, telling them they need to leave. Now, while Jason had defeated the Untitled, Starfire's little scuffle off in the distance was between an alien bounty hunter by the name of Crux. You know, Crux had used a power-draining device on Starfire, and she wasn't fighting at her full power anymore. And Roy catches up to them and pins down Crux, threatening to kill him if Starfire was hurt. But Starfire is nowhere to be seen. He does find her with the device attached to her and is attacked by Crux once again, and then is easily defeated by the pair of Starfire and Roy. And then we're back to where we just were, where Jason Todd tells Starfire and Roy that they need to get out of there. Jason drops Crux off at Arkham Asylum, and the team decide to steal one of his ships. And then Essence appeared. Essence is the one who told Jason about all of this at the beginning, and in return, Jason stabs her, claiming that she is the one responsible for the killing of the All-Cast. She reveals to him that Dukra is her mother, and it was linked to the Untitled, so that she is on her own mission, trying to kill all the Untitled herself. A fight breaks out, and Jason grabs a ray gun, and it turns out that it is not just any normal ray gun, it is a teleportation gun, and Essence disappears. Jason now decides that he's going to try and have a normal life, and he makes contact with a stewardess that he met earlier, but then decides that she is better off not having him in her life. The outlaws now decide to head to Gotham, where they are met with an enraged Susie Sue, who, after being attacked by Jason, slipped into a coma. And she reveals to the group that the reason she is after him is that he stole money from 7 of the crime families in Hong Kong to supply his little endeavor. And like I said earlier, Jason, in tow, kills an entire clan, and this allows new clans to rise up and take its place. One of those families was Susie Sue's family, and Jason had everything he needed, so he killed the entire clan and just left her and her father, like I said earlier, as a way to pay them back. Now Jason ends up fighting with Susie Sue again, and this time he ends up killing her, putting a bullet through her brain. And then a message from Alfred comes through, saying that all the Bat family need to get together, that the Court of Owls have multiple Talons, and the Talons are the Court's assassins, hired guns, whatever you want to put them. And they're set up around the city, and they're going to kill 40 people who have been shaping Gotham into what it is today. Tim Drake reaches out to Jason and requests him to stay and help, because as it happens, a couple of months ago, Jason got some intel for Tim, and Tim had now forgiven him for everything that he had done in the past, and he stays. Jason, Starfire and Roy are protecting Mr. Freeze, of all people, and they're looking out over a frozen part of Gotham, discussing the mission. Now a Talon does eventually come and battle Mr. Freeze, and Jason steps in to assist him. But in the process, Jason ends up getting his hand frozen as the Talon runs away. Jason chases after the Talon, and after a little fight, he runs away again. He eventually catches up with him again, and this time instead of fighting, the two have a little conversation, and the Talon begs Jason to kill him, in which Jason does so. Jason then meets with Batgirl and throws Mr. Freeze onto the rooftop for her and tells her that if she sees Batman, tell him you're welcome, and they leave Gotham. Well, remember that girl earlier, the stewardess? Well, Jason does decide to go on a date with her, and they get attacked by an alien, and a lot of spacey stuff happens, and we're not going to go into it because it's kind of confusing, and I didn't like that episode arc, but they eventually return to Earth, and Jason and Isabel are dropped off at her apartment, and stuff starts to get a little hot and heavy, and then Jason decides to go take a shower. He comes back and he realizes that Isabel had been attacked, and now there's needles everywhere. And then Jason's old friend, the Joker, appears on TV under the guise of a weatherman and tells Jason that she is still alive, and he has called the EMTs, but also the authorities, as the authorities head into the room. Jason fights off the police and gets the keys to a vehicle, where he is attacked by the Joker and is taken to an unknown location. Jason puts up a good fight, but he is defeated, and he is tied up with a now unconscious Tim Drake. You see, the Joker had learned all of their secret identities and was singling out the Bat family to take care of everyone. Jason is knocked unconscious by the Joker, and when he awakens, he is tied up with the rest of the Bat family. The Joker uses his Joker gas on all of them, with the intent on killing them all. However, they all manage to overcome the Joker's mind control through the love and trust they share for one another. After these events, Jason goes back to Wayne Manor to say goodbye. After talking with Nightwing, Robin, Alfred and Batman, Jason puts on his helmet and tightens it up. However, the helmet reveals a strange hologram of the Joker, because during his incarceration, the Joker had modified it. A voice starts to come out over the helmet. It's the Joker's voice, and he says that Jason played a joke on him, and that he wasn't laughing. And then the mask starts to spew out some gas, and Jason starts laughing maniacally. The rest of the family rush to help, but it's too late, as Jason falls over, and his face is seen to be completely burnt. You see, the Joker had planted an acid bomb in the mask, leaving Jason in a critical condition. Jason is met by his old friend and mentor, Dukra, in a dream, where he must make the choice of living in the past or letting go and going for the future. Jason admits that he loves his friend and lets go of the past, and finally wakes up and apologizes to Bruce. But Bruce cuts him off and hugs him instead, Bruce brings Jason on a mission where they stop some mercenaries in Ethiopia. It is revealed to be a ruse by Bruce to bring Jason to where he died and try to reawaken the memory so Bruce could bring Damien back to life. Jason and Bruce fight, but Jason eventually stops and takes the car, leaving Bruce to remain by himself. Roy and Starfire go in search of Jason, and they find him in an Al-Cost hideaway, and they find the old monk that they met earlier, the monk with the memories. Jason watches as Roy and Corey are taken through Jason's memories by this monk to understand what he went through, and the new revelation that came about where Jason saved Roy the day before he left to track down his mother. Jason wishes for Roy to just start over, but Roy tranquilizes him, and the group are teleported away, back into the mountains with Dukra, Essence, and the monk watching over them. The group return to their island base, and Jason accesses the files of himself, and finds out what he has done in the past as a killer. And he gets angry at the team and feels like they've been lying to him this whole time. But the group are then assaulted by the Cheshire Cat, but are helped out by the Green Arrow. Cheshire manages to escape, but in the midst of everything, Jason ends up secretly leaving as well, stowing away on the Green Arrow's airplane. Jason is then searched for by the League of Assassins, and they, surprisingly, are not after him to kill him. They tell him that it is his destiny to lead the League against the Untitled. The same group were responsible for destroying his prior mentor, the Allcast. Jason is skeptical due to his amnesia, but the League assures him that they won't have to worry as the defenses around the sacred city are impenetrable, as the technology needed to breach it isn't readily available on Earth. But the Untitled have deceived Roy Harper into helping them, playing on his loyalty to his friends and his desire to protect Jason. Using Roy Harper's engineering skills, they design a weapon to help breach the sacred city and rescue his friend. Now, the next portion of this history is DC Rebirth, and I haven't read these yet, so it's not fair for me to go through all this with you. But I do know that certain things that I just told you from Flashpoint are no longer in there. Stuff gets changed around. So I'm going to leave that out. I'm going to leave it here, and maybe if somebody has read DC Rebirth of Red Hood and the Outlaws, maybe you can tell me what happens. Now, this episode was requested by my daughter, and I know it's not the Robin that you probably wanted, but I'm not even sure if she's going to listen to this one. But if anybody out there would like to request a character or group of characters for me to cover, you can do so over on my social media. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and I'm at All Geeks Aside on all platforms. And also, I want to give a shout out to a podcast that I just discovered literally today, thanks to the Facebook group, The Podcast We Listen To, which is also a podcast in itself. The podcast that I listen to is an Irish podcast. Thanks very much for listening. I know that this episode is a kind of confusing one. It is rather confusing with the whole multiverse and the Flashpoint occurrence. I tried to make it as easily understandable as possible. Hopefully next week's show will be a little bit easier. I would like to do some more of the Bat Family, so if you would like to request the next character from the Bat Family, that would be great. Thanks for listening. Until next time.